Thank You, Mr. Darwin, by Anaxagoras Pen. Darwin 1. Mr. Darwin, please consider these insights into the deeper motivations of your most severe critics, the clergy. The subconscious aspects of their outrage arises from the way natural selection supplants our culture's origin story and their speaking role in it. One thing that utterly galls them about your work is that it proves creation isn't a single spectacular event. For a creation story to engage them, it must begin with the powerful intention of a lofty speaking character inciting its beginning and then proceeding at a much brisker pace than natural selection. One must admit, creation by process is long, drawn out, and boring. Not dramatic like creation by God's intention, which is accomplished in the neat span of 1 week with a Sabbath day as denouement. An even greater irritation is the absence of speaking roles. Religious leaders profit almost entirely from the speaking of words. Voice is to their temperament a sacred oracle. While not conscious of it, they believe they are creators by the voicing of words. Like them, God speaks, and reality materializes in their minds, if nowhere else. If this analysis seems far-fetched, I beg you to consider the nature of the people we are talking about. The religious temperament is inherently dramatic. Take my father, for example. He attended church only sporadically because our local preacher bored him. My father was consistently disgusted by this man's incessant requests for money and his pathetic calls for ever greater sanctity. Our farm town's noble parson would often say, "The good is never good enough." This infuriated my father, who complained, "He's always whining about the same thing, week in, week out, hogwash." Monotony of any kind frustrated my father. He much preferred the traveling preachers whose visits became special occasions. Revivalists are never boring. They deliver exhilarating sermons, colored with heartwarming interludes. The services they perform always end in a climactic altar call. My father never failed to participate in an altar call. The dramatic aspect of these performances and the invitation to participate had an irresistible appeal to him. So it wasn't surprising when word came to him of countless revivals going on back east, where the second coming of Christ was spoken of as near at hand. The lure of them was irresistible to him. From the moment he heard about these exciting gatherings, it was certain that he would go there and join them. To skip ahead briefly, not long after joining the Second Coming movement, my father would become a preacher himself, and every sermon he delivered upstaged by a long measure the man who still serves our town today. Despite my father's somewhat glaring faults, I find him very enjoyable to write about. Please humor me as I speak at length about him. I tell of his faults with sincere admiration, not as one who does so from an attitude of moral superiority. My father is a captivating dramatic character, far more interesting than myself, and I feel compelled to tell you his story. My father owned and perpetually read the complete works of William Shakespeare, but he never wished to be an actor. He didn't want to play Henry V. He wanted to be Henry V. Farming bored him to death. He once told me every season took too long to arrive, lasted far too long, and then ended too soon. I've since concluded that his intense dislike of farming stemmed from its failure to play out in the opportune timing and mood-appropriate pacing of a well-executed drama. His other perpetual read was the Holy Bible. I fondly remember his understanding of God's words to Adam and Eve after the fall. According to my father's reading of Scripture, farming comes straight from the devil, and he believed the 3rd chapter of Genesis sustains that premise. His low opinion of marriage was supported by these same foundational scriptures, the ones where God sentenced Adam and Eve to farming, marital contention, and childbearing, because they succumbed to the devil's machinations. As a lifelong churchgoer, the fall does come up occasionally, and the memory of my father's interpretation never fails to make me lighthearted, which on occasion has leaked out and put me in an odd position. I could not recite his interpretation in our farming community's church building, but this interpretation is consistent with a plain reading of that portion of Scripture. Farming and marriage are spoken of as penalties, and the devil is the direct cause of all of Adam and Eve's troubles. One simply never hears anyone else interpret it that way, so it only seems odd. I suppose this serves a good purpose, reminding me not to take farming, Scripture, or myself too seriously. This material world of real things oppressed my father's spirit. The day-to-day responsibility and immovable nature of material facts were things best driven from his mind by his overactive imagination. When the overwhelming need for Second Coming revivalism took hold of his spiritual being, my father wanted to sell the farm right out from under us, but my mother scared off the prospective buyer with a shotgun. Please don't get the wrong impression. At the time this was happening, my father believed my mother and I would be accompanying him to the land of Second Coming revivalism. It was very uncharacteristic of my mother to oppose him, but she stood up to him with an unwavering determination that for a brief time thwarted his own. She tried to help him see reason. I remember her saying to him, "Let Jesus come back on his own time, and if he likes, he can visit us here on the farm." Such passivity would never move my father to anything but deep sleep. So he went to bed early that night, and the next morning he was gone. He took the family's savings and ran off to meet the Second Coming of Christ. He would not rest again until he dropped dead from exhaustion, worshiping with the people who were filled with the Holy Ghost and fully expectant of the Lord's glorious return. Soon after his arrival in the heartland of Second Coming revivalism, the man who started it all by talking about prophecies in the book of Daniel set a specific date for Christ's return. The founder was rather cautious about date setting, but after much cajoling from followers for a specific date, he set one. He qualified this first specific date with warnings that due to the vagaries of ancient calendars and the almost 2 millennia since the resurrection of Christ in Jerusalem, his determination of the timing of actual return might be somewhat less than exact. So when Christ failed to appear, the disappointment was minor, but a penchant for date setting and date believing was firmly established in his followers. My father possessed a natural gift for oratory and soon became one of the lay preachers who, in so new and disorganized a religious body, had all the powers of an ordained minister. The movement drew in believers from all faiths, but a few Protestant faiths of similar character predominated and provided all of the venues for services. Most of the establishment ministers in these faiths stopped supporting the movement when the date-believing mania took hold. This transferred religious credence to men like my father, who now captured the loyalty of lifelong believers disaffected by their establishment ministers' lack of enthusiasm for Christ's return. Being a charismatic man with strong persuasive ability, my father got access to the historic calendars and other date-setting tools used by the movement's founder and joined those who moved into leadership after the founder's initial failure. He and another lay preacher were vying for followers, and each hoped to gain predominance over the other by setting specific dates of Christ's return. This competition was during the summer following another minor disappointment, and Second Coming camp meeting mania was at a fevered pitch. My father had gotten a significant edge on the other man by further distancing believers from their establishment churches. He did this by introducing Saturday worship, because Saturday is the Jewish Sabbath. This and other innovations convinced his followers that they were fully preparing for Christ's imminent return. Of course, he kept Sunday services going so his followers would not by habit visit their former congregations. Setting a countdown timer is a great dramatic tool. So he and the other man both set a date. Two set a date. My father waited for the other man to announce the service where his specific date would be revealed, and then announced his own date-setting event as the Saturday 1 week before the other man's event. This further increased his advantage on the other man. Everyone would come to my father's date-setting event. Only the doubters would attend the event occurring a week and a day later. The time frame was too compact for the other man to reschedule, so all the excitement of the entire movement's followers became centered on the event where my father would reveal the day of the Lord's imminent return. I'm sorry. I've gotten ahead of an important part of the story. That spring I had come of age. I was now 18 years old and able to enter into a legally binding contract. My mother had not divorced my father. She entertained hopes he would return after this fever passes. She had become as stoic as Cicero, but occasionally she was paralyzed by one overwhelming anxiety. She feared, with those crafty Easterners having control over him, your father is likely to sell this farm right out from under us. She could bear anything, except the prospect that all our labors might be undone without us being able to do a thing about it. I shared her anxiety and would do anything in my power to assuage it. So, it was decided that I would arm myself and carry the farm's precious deed into the very depth of our fears, where I would convince my father to sign legal possession of the farm over to me. We hoped he would see this as reasonable, because I was now doing all of the work and functioning as head of our household in his absence. I trusted he would do so, but given my mother's profound anxiety concerning crafty Easterners, I was sure they would stop at nothing, perhaps even stooping as low as my murder to compel my father to accede to their profit at our family's expense. On my voyage east, many frightful scenarios presented themselves to my imagination. I regretted that the large-caliber pistol I carried on my person held only 6 bullets. I brought my favorite rifle and shotgun in my grip, but I doubted I would be put in a place to use the firearms I was far more familiar with. The thought of compelling my father at pistol point crossed my mind. I quickly banished it, but resolved that if anyone, including him, attempted to take possession of the deed contrary to my intention, the first dead man would not be me. My unflinching resolve would thwart cowardly souls animated by nefarious intention. I arrived as my father was shoring up the enthusiastic support of a large number of followers. To my profound relief, there was not a crafty Easterner in sight. Everyone around my father was taking orders from him. Not even the other leaders in the movement were his superior, and this included the founder. My father had to consider their feelings, but he was quite free of any control by them. I was struck by how utterly undemocratic a church run this way is. The preachers run these places like petty tyrants. Their dominant personalities create in their followers an instinctual obedience far greater than that of the very best trained dog. To digress, my own minister in our town, whom my father so denigrated, is not at all like that. As the senior deacon of our church, any reasonable suggestion I make gets implemented. Of course, if monies are involved, I fund the program, which does contribute to his amenability, but he is no petty tyrant. Upon informing my father of the intention of my errand, he signed the farm over to me without giving it a moment's thought. His instant consent at the mere suggestion of the act leads me to believe that he never once wanted to neglect his family. His powerful dramatic imagination's hold on him was simply too strong to resist. He was a man enthralled by the spell his own imagination had cast. I didn't tell him of my mother's profound anxiety. The idea that his actions troubled her seemed not to enter his mind. Perhaps that was part of the spell. Of course, I stayed with him for a few days, and any doubt that I might have had that persons of a religious temperament are inherently dramatic was forever removed. They were very nice people. Not a thief or a drunkard among them, but their dramatic personalities animated their fervent faith. The love they showered on me and my status as the preacher's son were astounding. From the time of my arrival, I was likened to the prodigal son of Luke's gospel. One of them said it, and the rest of them adopted the term without giving it a moment's thought. Please take a moment to consider the ease with which these folks assumed a parallel to the scriptures they adored, and the rich irony of their characterizing my relations to my father as prodigal, as if the likeness was a perfect fit. My status as a prodigal son was so entertaining that never once did I attempt to correct them. With folks like that, attempts to align their beliefs to facts on the ground cannot possibly succeed, so it is of no matter that I never tried. The memory of that aspect of the trip never failed to raise a laugh on the way home or amongst my neighbors when I returned. My mother did not laugh at hearing I was likened to the prodigal son. When I was young, she had often laughed, mostly when my father told her his thoughts. But after his departure from the family, her laughter was forever silenced. Following that event, both of us became very serious people. I am fortunate to have the temperament of a reasonable optimist. I was easily able to shoulder with good humor the great responsibilities that were thrust upon me in my youth, and now I am a substantial man with very few regrets. I was most pleased with my trip, and very happy that my mother's imagination would no longer be plagued by the fear that her livelihood and home could be sold out from beneath her. I see now that my successful discharge of every responsibility given me is beyond rewarding. It is a source of deep fulfillment. During the summer after my trip east, my father was in a volatile campaign for followers and had set up an event where he would announce the date of Christ's imminent return. At a camp meeting packed with thousands of passionate followers, the day's events were electric. There was heartfelt music, there was enthusiastic singing, and there was fiery preaching. The period between this day and the Lord's second coming would be a time for the purification of the saved, a final opportunity to reach the unsaved, and a final chance to convince doubtful, lukewarm Christians of the Lord's great imminency. Many followers had already sold their earthly possessions and were living in makeshift tent communities set up at movement strongholds. Those who hadn't sold would be expected to sell all after the date's announcement, fearing the fate of Ananias and Sapphira if they held anything back. During any other camp meeting, my father would have been highly visible at each of the day's events. But this day he hid from the excited crowds, adding mystique to the day's vibrant rituals and deepening the believers' already fevered anticipation. He planned the event so the sun would begin setting as the prophetic announcement rang out. He calculated that the certainty of the date would sink into the movement's collective consciousness as the summer night fell upon them. During a scheduled break, word of the announcement was leaked to the expectant crowd. This brought everyone together before the stage as the program for the climactic event began. Vigorous singing of the movement's favorite hymns got the crowd into the rhythm of the historic moment. My father came out on stage and opened strong with a dramatic description of the burning up of the wicked and the purification of the saved during the first moments of Christ's glorious return. He paused for effect, and in the lull following this rousing beginning, he exhorted everyone to begin observing Jewish dietary restrictions. Then, after this calm interlude, he began to pick up the pace, but found it difficult to preach in his animated style. The weeks leading up to the announcement had been very taxing on my father. He worked much, slept little, and was one very busy petty tyrant. He suffered from the intense stress which one feeling a godlike need to control everything around him entails. He had felt a bit under the weather in the anxious minutes before taking the stage, but his theatrical personality transformed him the moment he was before this massive audience. Up till now, this excitement invigorated him, but soon after announcing the new dietary rules, everything suddenly changed. He was in awful pain and short of breath. He vomited, fell to the floor, and convulsed violently as people rushed in to help him. There was nothing they could do. After several minutes of agonizing palpitations, my father's heart finally stopped, and he died right there. As death scenes go, it was unforgettable, far more vivid than any actor playing Hamlet. To these dramatically inclined folks, the timing of my father's startling death was a vibrant prophetic sign. With only one date now being set, what would have been the source of perplexing uncertainty had been settled by an act of God. Because he died before announcing the date he had set, it could not have been right. So the other man's date must be the correct one. They concluded with absolute certainty that the Lord had to take him to keep us from being misled. What an awful error his calculations must have been. God's absolute truth will be revealed to us at next week's camp meeting. After his death, my father's rivals welcomed his followers into their ranks, and the other date setter was elevated to the status of a biblical prophet. This man, whom my father had so skillfully edged out, was assigned a credibility he would never have enjoyed without my father's sudden death. However, his victory would soon become Pyrrhic when the Lord failed to return on the date he set. This would be the last specific date setting and become known as the final disappointment. It seems strangely auspicious that one as dramatic as my father should die on a stage before thousands. It tempts one to conclude he died happy, delivering his ultimate swan song. But I fear he died unfulfilled, an empty man trying to fill a real life with unsubstantial imaginative performance. A death scene before thousands only seems to be fulfilling. In reality, it's just one more seeming thing in a long string of seeming things, appearing substantial, but being empty, unsubstantial, vain, and in vain. On a parched August day that seemed like the hottest day of my life, at the height of a terrible drought, with my crops dying and my animals suffering, I received by telegram the news of my father's death. My neighbors assured me they would see to what needed doing on the farm in my absence, and I set out the next day by train, telegramming those who assumed responsibility for my father's burial of the time of my expected arrival. They had a carriage waiting for me when I arrived, and we went straight to the cemetery. The service began with my arrival. He was not the man to me that he was to them, so I said very few words. I politely declined their sincere offers of hospitality, staying instead at a hotel near the train station. I was sorely tempted to be very short with these people, to lash out with a violence of words at these creatures of imagination. I was referred to several times as the prodigal son, which made restraint especially difficult, but I managed to retain possession of myself and behave graciously. I returned to my farm, where I've led a life that would have bored my father to death. But this life has left me feeling grateful and fulfilled. Darwin 2. Mr. Darwin, given the dramatic character of the religious temperament and the role being the voice of God plays in religious leadership, the slow-paced monotony of natural selection isn't a cultural narrative the clergy can embrace. They are actors whose every line has been cut from that play. It gets worse for them. The eternal and infinite process that is the cause of all things and the means of our true creation is impossible to express as a narrative. Things like the life cycle of a star or a planet can be narrated, but the operations of the universal process cannot. Please hear me out on this. Being a man of means, every year I donate a substantial number of books to our community's free public library. I order them in the fall, so I will have them for my winter reading. Last year I bought the wonderful 1875 Encyclopedia Britannica and the 6th edition of your book on natural selection. Of primary importance to my discoveries are Britannica's exhaustive section on chemistry and its article on the science of atomic processes by James Clerk Maxwell. The combination of your book and these articles enlighten me about the universal process that is the eternal cause of all things. In Britannica's article about the atom, Maxwell first summarizes your theory of evolution and then describes a comparison of that with the composition of elemental atoms. He writes the following: "But a theory of evolution of this kind cannot be applied to the case of atoms, for the individual atoms neither are born nor die. They have neither parents nor offspring, and so far from being modified by their environment, we find that two atoms of the same kind, say of hydrogen, have the same properties, though one has been compounded with carbon and buried in the earth as coal for untold ages, while the other has been occluded in the iron of a meteorite, and after unknown wanderings in the heavens has at last fallen into the hands of some terrestrial chemist." James Clerk Maxwell. Maxwell exposes the two levels of process operating as our visible world and the particle universe beneath it. There are the processes of our sensible universe, such as natural selection, and beneath that there is the particle level where processes of a different character operate. Natural selection operates in the world of things, where local, temporal, and discrete things come to be, exist for a time, and pass away. On this level of process, things are limited by boundaries. The boundaries may be porous and ill-defined, but they delineate things as discrete entities that are limited to a distinct location in space and time. This is the world of things we experience with our senses, and the universe we observe using telescopes. Our sun and earth came to be by these processes, so local and temporal does not imply brief and small. Since some bounded things endure for long periods and occupy vast spaces, the orbits of the planets, our ocean tides, and other cyclical processes in the world of things appear to operate with complete invariability. But an eternal view of these things reveals that they came to be and will pass away like any other bounded thing. In our world of things, the processes by which bounded things come to be masquerade to our perceptions as paradigmatic, but are heuristic in nature. Natural selection is a process that is archetypical of this dynamic. Since in theory, every variation could be beneficial to each organism, those variations which prove not to be beneficial are errors. Organisms exist to thrive, so variations that fail to benefit thriving are, by definition, errors. A true paradigmatic process would not only operate by some apparent law of action, it would also not produce errors. What Maxwell pointed out with this comparison is that elemental atoms, by whatever subatomic processes they come to be, do not come to be with beneficial or detrimental variations. Though one has been compounded with carbon and buried in the earth as coal for untold ages, while the other has been occluded in the iron of a meteorite. Processes operating in the particle universe are paradigmatic. Their operations are invariable and don't generate errors. This particle level is where the true uniformitarian process operates. The variable changes in the sensible universe of our perceptions are the results of this invariable process. Beneath the heuristic processes of the world we see is the invisible, paradigmatic level of particle matter, where the physical universe is actually one invariable ongoing universal process. A unitary process that envelops the heuristic world of variability and error into its invariable particle reality. Not only is this level inaccessible to ordinary sense perception, it is alien to us. We are everything it is not. We are local, temporal, discrete beings, while the particle universe is infinite, eternal, and boundless. We come to be as a bounded being in one place in time and space. We exist for a time in a limited amount of space, and then we pass away. Because of this, we have a story. Narrative is inherent in the nature of our being. Unlike us in every way, the particle universe operating by one uniform paradigmatic process is by nature impossible to narrate as story. Scenes are the basis for all narrative, and in unchanging particle reality there is none of the distinct events that create dramatic scenes. In the particle universe, the cast of characters is duplicated by infinite number, giving the whole thing an undramatic nature. There are no heroes, no villains, no extras. There is no beginning, middle, or end. Nothing incites its non-beginning. Nothing makes its non-ending meaningful. There is no foreground, no background, no place that is not the stage of action from which an audience could view it. This anti-narrative essence is most obvious, but also the last one most people would ever consider important. Even now, you may not have grasped the significance of this simple aspect of scientific reality. Special creation is a striking, dramatic event. The brief, incremental timeline of creation in Genesis makes the narrative exciting, and the obvious intention of Almighty God drives each scene and its powerful drama. Truth aside, it's a fantastic story, and we instinctively believe interesting stories where intention drives events in a scene-by-scene cause and effect chain. While not essential, intention plays a vital role in dramatic storytelling. The powerful intention of strong-willed characters drive exciting stories. Any story characterized by an absence of intention will lack the excitement of a personalized drama. There is no intention in the pure science of natural selection and the invariable universal process beneath it. Because it operates on the heuristic level, natural selection can be narrated in story form, but truly accurate narrations of natural selection's processes cannot be animated by intentional agents. Because of the absence of intention, a narration of natural selection could never rival the intense drama of special creation. All it can do is spoil an incredibly good story people have an instinct to believe. The clergy complain that it will foster unbelief, but unbelief is never at the root of great misery. And for the preachers to lose their speaking role, they would have to shut up, and we all know they won't. Perhaps a preacher here or there will lose a paying job, but I expect they will have even more to shout about than before natural selection came along. Natural selection won't end religious belief either. There has never been much actual mercy in Christianity. The ordinary attitude is to talk about afflicted people getting what they deserve, and the idea of survival of the fittest can only help that along. Take the simple farmer, for example. Those who supply him know him as a price payer. He needs, so he must buy, whatever the price. When he sells his crop, he is a price taker. He must sell the crop, so he takes what they offer. When he goes broke, which he often does because of these exact circumstances, they all say it was his own fault. I don't see the survival of the fittest idea doing him any favors, but it won't be doing anything moralizing founded on religious sentiment wasn't already doing. Your critics see themselves as much better than they are and cannot see that these new doctrines mostly amplify their own unacknowledged wrongs. Religious belief has always been a political tool useful to powerful interests, and it appears these interests may have found a better God to replace the God of the preachers, who has been the source of much self-doubt and inhibition. Most prominent individuals are already convinced of their own superiority, and they will eagerly embrace ideas like survival of the fittest. The political-minded and ambitious will see it as the reason they always had to be so ruthless. A doctrine that justifies self-enriching actions in simple, axiomatic terms is superior in every way to one that invites self-doubt. So perhaps the clergy has been bested in ways they would rather not admit. The way survival of the fittest will be incorporated into the structures of society is where the real danger lies. In truth, natural selection is an impersonal process that lacks the intention to favor anyone or anything, but it can be warped into becoming a powerful social narrative. Nature can be made into an omnipotent God who blesses her favorites and damns their opponents. In economics, natural selection is already seen as free trade favoring the industrious, and survival of the fittest has sanctified many ruthless business practices. As I showed with the simple farmer example, things were already going that way, and now survival of the fittest amplifies the pernicious narrative of justification they already believe. And it leaves out the aspects of Christianity that trouble them. Christianity invites prominent individuals to practice self-examination. A practicing Christian, being a conscientious person, ought to ask, how does what I'm doing affect others? I have done this myself, and refrain from profiting by harm. The passing away of this idea is a welcome thing to those who refuse to practice it. The new thinking, based in survival of the fittest, invites no self-examination. It would condemn sentiments like that as weak and irresponsible. There is nothing in survival of the fittest to invite anything but scorn for those deemed unfit. Survival of the fittest condemns its sinners in the here and now, instead of leaving judgment to God in the afterlife. We could soon see nature turned into an omnipotent God, having understandable intentions. Survival of the fittest is far more narratively direct than the unknowable will of God. Instead of guessing the God of the Bible's mysterious intentions, everyone will already know the will of this God, and the path to favor will be plain to see. Simply be in the superior position, and you will be nature's favorite. A country can adopt nature as their God by seeing themselves as superior. The country's origin story becomes its creation myth, driven by nature's omnipotent intention to see her favorite thrive. It would require an imagination far darker than mine to see how far a proud nation, convinced of its own superiority, could take a heartless dogma like survival of the fittest. Perhaps within the clergy's gut-wrenching dread is an instinctive fear of being replaced. They may already fear nature becoming the omnipotent God of Darwinism. Some of them might even have been rattled enough to take up a self-examination of their own beliefs and seen the weakness of their passionate embrace of the counterfactual. But the great majority of them, like the multitude of religious leaders who came before them, will never see it as their own responsibility to have a philosophy of deity capable of creating our world as it truly is. The problem religious leaders suffer from today is one their predecessors ought to have solved a very long time ago. Men of their ilk have shirked this problem for centuries, destroying the messengers of truth whenever they could and ignoring the real problem they have on their hands. And this was easy for them, because religious leaders are creatures of imagination who flee from substantial reality and refuse to think in its terms. For ages, a theology that describes deity as consistent with reality has been needed and not been available to meet the needs of our understanding. It's about time we got a theology that makes sense. Until last year, I was a church-going unbeliever. Unlike my father's fervent faith, my unbelief never caused anyone any grief, so I never felt compelled to change it. However, I have always believed there is a God. I just felt that people are incapable of understanding deity. For some reason, it's a thing we always get wrong. In my father's case, very wrong. During that winter, when I read the 6th edition of On the Origin of Species, I began pondering the moral fallout from the survival of the fittest idea at work in the psyche of our society and the hollow arguments the clergy was making against natural selection. It was obvious to me that a vital piece of the puzzle was missing, so I began to look for it. That's when I saw the significance of what Maxwell said about the invariable nature of the particle universe, and observed that this paradigmatic level of reality cannot be narrated. This idea that the universal process cannot be narrated was the key that led to my enlightenment. It opened the door that led to the world beneath our perceptions. Until then, my intuition failed to overcome the obscuring influence of narrative thinking. After seeing narrative impossibility, I stopped looking for human-like intentions that would fit particle reality into a story. I was able to see the creative aspect of the paradigmatic process and wondered what kept it all unified. Embodiment is the key. The universal process is the homeostatic operations of the boundless being where all the paradigmatic processes of the particle universe work together for the single organismic purpose of thriving. I was seeing a thriving universe and concluded it must be the embodiment of the ultimate supreme being, God. So God is our creator after all, not by dramatic acts of conscious intention, but by the processes of boundless being. I was astonished, but I felt no compulsion to tell anybody about it. At first, I refused to believe I had been enlightened at all. But now I'm willing to accept this burden that has been shirked for centuries by those who should have met its responsibilities. This is a responsibility I'm able to take up and execute with skill. Theology isn't difficult to me. I've seen through the fallacy that God is like us and can be known by the same perceptions and self-reference we use to understand one another. When one abandons that fallacy and embraces sound informal logic, a deity that makes sense follows. The magical creatures of imagination vanish, and a truly substantial deity whose embodiment is the particle universe appears. A deity of limitless personality whose being's paradigmatic life process is responsible for the creation of the world we see, where things come to be, exist for a time, and pass away. As an unprepared youth, I gladly took up the responsibilities my father abandoned. These were heavy responsibilities that have crushed mature men. I trust you gathered from the story of my father that I am not bitter, but grateful instead. Nor do I despise the countless religious leaders who fail to see God as something greater than a disembodied man with a formidable array of magical powers. I've taken up the responsibility they've shirked with a glad heart and willing hands. Questions asked during decades of unbelief have been answered, and even greater illumination is ongoing. Chasing the muse of my enlightenment has been an enjoyable adventure, so I don't consider the responsibility ages of error have laid on my shoulders a bitter burden. Instead, it's a rich source of deep contentment in my mature years. In the attached sketch, I will show that a non-anthropomorphic theology gives rise to a deity whose being creates by processes, including natural selection, and could do so no other way. Thank you, Mr. Darwin, for helping me find God. Sincerely, Anaxagoras Pen. Darwin 3. A brief sketch of non-anthropomorphic theology. I do not intend to go into great detail. For now, I will only show an infinite and eternal deity whose physical embodiment is a universal process that is the sole underlying cause for all things. Creation by process, rather than intention, will follow from the theology's logic, regardless of the fact that the deity, being a limitless personality, does have conscious intention. It's amazing how easily this worldview all falls into place like water filling a container of any shape. Its fluid nature becomes an adaptable way of looking at things, especially people. I expect to finish with theology over the next couple of years, but the philosophy's capacity to better understand people is inexhaustible. the anti-narrative reality of the paradigmatic level. There is no beginning, no middle, no end in the realm of uniformitarian particle process. Time is boundless. From our position in the present, we look back to an infinite past and forward to an infinite future. Eternity is part of how our minds perceive things. Things take place on an eternal timeline, and nothing instinctual to our perceptions finds this objectionable. The concept of boundless material space strikes our instinctive perceptions a different way. When I say the physical universe, my mind imagines a vast but bounded thing, and the idea that it has no origin and has no ending raises an instinctual objection in my mind. The point I'm making is that our perceptions of time create very different inferences than our perceptions of space. We put events onto an eternal timeline, but look for the spatial boundaries of things and add them when obvious boundaries are missing. Spatial boundaries include a thing's coming to be and passing away. Because it is alien to our perceptions, boundless space is likely to be debated while eternal time is mostly accepted. This split perception is counterfactual because space is just where all that time in the eternal past happened, where the present is happening, and where the future will occur. Uniformitarian time is just a constant movement of the plenary particle process happening in the boundless physical universe. Time and space are one thing, and I will begin using the term space-time to express this as the sketch proceeds. The best example of spatial perception limiting our ability to grasp boundless deity is our instinctive interpretation of the word body as a thing having well-defined boundaries that moves about in the world. The boundless universe, as the embodiment of the living God, is the opposite of this perception. The things of our world move about within the boundless universe, and it is boundless in the most absolute meaning of that term. Understanding this requires one to think like a dispassionate scientist or philosopher and see embodiment of any kind as an active, ongoing process. In humans and animals, a body begins with its generation by reproduction, exists as its life process, and then passes away. The process is the essential thing, not the outer layer of skin and fur that give it its distinct outline. This is an example of our perception hiding the essential things behind mere appearance. The eternal and infinite universal process of God's embodiment are essential, and the absence of skin and fur is irrelevant. The concept of boundless embodiment is the most difficult to grasp of all the philosophy's ideas because our perceptions and intuitions see bodies as solid things, not as ongoing processes. Narrative cannot function with the cast of characters in particle reality. There are too many players. There are almost 200 elements, 4 forces, and a couple of dozen subatomic ingredient particles that make up all the aforementioned elements. Because each of these actors has an important role, this is too large a primary cast even for a great epic. But the nature of the players dashes epic ambition into an infinite number of pieces. Except for the forces, each of these players is infinitely duplicated with identical perfection. And there is no one of them who performs in the foreground while the others inhabit the background as extras. With a cast of this nature, narrative is a functional impossibility. Narrative impossibility is a fortunate thing because the plenary particle process moves at an invariable pace and nothing unusual ever happens. Invariability nullifies the concept of an event. No events, no scenes. This ultimate monotony is nothing anyone would want to watch for entertainment, and it happens everywhere, so there would be no place in which the narrative was not physically playing out. An audience for ultimate monotony is a physical impossibility because there wouldn't be anywhere for an audience to sit if there were one. There is no hero, no villain. Notice the shift from plural to singular. The boundless deity is a solitary being, and this reveals the absolute uselessness of anthropomorphism. We are social creatures. Every one of us was sired by a man and born of a woman. We all become part of a society. Even feelings of alienation and loneliness are not born of solitude, but arise from the human need for society. That we should think that we could ever use our feelings to understand the feelings of a completely solitary being is just plain wrong, and that ought to be very obvious to us. But it is not. We think we can understand God the way we guess the intentions of our friends. No hero. God is omnipotent. A hero must be vulnerable. The obstacles must be difficult, and many minor ones leading up to the climax must thwart the hero's intentions. That is not a role fitted to an omnipotent being of unthwartable intention. No villain. All of our negative feelings follow from thwarted intentions. Absent any thwarting, we would have nothing to be angry about. Given the nature of our social existence and limited personalities, this is physically impossible. The point I am making by this rather obvious negative anthropomorphism is that I can see no reason for an omnipotent being ever to become angry. There is no villain's baleful motive to make the narrative interesting, and from my observations, it appears there is a benevolence without favoritism aspect to life here on earth. The intellect, emotion, and volition structure of God's limitless personality isn't anthropomorphic because this mind, heart, and will structure is found in all living things. Pond slime knows when the sun is shining and when it is not. Pond slime loves the sun and grows by intention towards it. Personality structure is basic to all living things everywhere in the world, so it's reasonable to assume its presence in the nature of limitless personality. The intellect, emotion, and volition personality structure essential to functionality in all living things is inherent in the nature of the universe. The intellectual content, emotional nature, and actual intentions of the limitless personality of God, which I just outlined, are by nature inscrutable to limited personalities like ours. Only a limitless mind could comprehend the thoughts of a limitless mind. Only a personality without the experience of negative emotions could understand the emotional nature of a personality characterized by limitless emotion. Unthwartable volition is nothing at all like our own, so we cannot hope to guess it by self-reference. The general structure of God's personality can be outlined, but its contents are inscrutable to us, not because we lack enlightenment, but because of who we are and who God is. Apparently, I failed to abstain entirely from anthropomorphism. Such is the nature of language and human expression using it. I'll leave off the narrative theme and try some informal logic instead. The greatest failing of theologians is seen in their use of the word attributes. Is a person ever kind because someone says they are? They may indeed be kind, but it will not be the result of kindness being attributed to them. Kindness must follow naturally from the operations of their personality. So, logical point number one is that things like omniscience, omnipotence, etc. must follow from the operations of the deity's personality and being. what operations would result in omniscience? This has a fairly simple answer, but I did not explain boundless embodiment from the start as I intended to. God is an embodied being. Disembodied personalities exist only in fiction. In reality, personality is by nature an embodied thing. Personality operates over time in embodied beings. So, logical point number 2 is that God, contrary to the mental image of a human-like spirit which many people construct, is an embodied being. The boundless universe is the material stuff of God's being, and particle processes are the life of God's being. Boundlessness is a difficult concept for any bounded being to contemplate. My suggesting a boundless body, even for an eternal and infinite deity, might not be accepted by your perceptions. For now, please accept it provisionally so you can follow my thinking. There is quite a lot to being that I cannot get into now. And this explanation is, I admit, very deficient. But it will have to suffice for now. As I said, theology is easy to me. I hope you enjoyed this sketch. I have a great desire to send the letter I put much work into writing. I fear if I try to fix the glaring insufficiency of this sketch, we will both be dead before I am finished. So I send it along, warts and all. I am fascinated by the idea that these concepts ought to have become known to ancient philosophers. I have now in the works a short story about the logician William Ockham that gives this idea form. I shall finish it soon. I hope to hear from you soon, and will send a copy of the Ockham piece along in my next correspondence. Anaxagoras Pen. Postscript. And creation is the result of the processes inherent in God's embodiment. There is a subconscious intention to thrive incorporated into the homeostatic processes of every embodied being. This subconscious intention is simply to thrive, and it is distinct from conscious intention. So, natural selection is just a sub-process in the boundless being of God, and creation is by process, not conscious intention. Creation, as an eternal ongoing process, is long and slow and offers no dramatic competition to the way a preacher projecting his voice shouts, "Let there be light." And there was light. Have a nice day. AP. Thank you, Mr. Darwin. And Occam's Epiphany. Copyright 2024.
The limitless deity does not have human-like expectations. So in limitation philosophy, our relationship to God and to one another is realistic and sane. Occam's Epiphany concludes by introducing the concept of limitation instead of original sin. The word limitation, like the word humility, is not a label one naturally espouses, but like humility, it is very healthy in practice. One who stops seeing himself as sinful and instead understands his limited nature gets off his own back and stops resenting others. How bad can that be? Imagine, if you will, a world full of people who understand one another as limited beings instead of expecting all sorts of perfections. Human beings are ill-equipped to deliver. To learn more about these powerful concepts and many more like them, visit limitationphilosophy.com. Thank you for watching.